Afghanistan has 429 districts. Depending on who you ask, the Taliban has already taken over between 150 to 200 of these. They're taking over another 5 to 6 per day. Now, the extraordinary thing is that over the course of the past 20 years, the Taliban has dramatically expanded their base of support. They've built inroads in communities all over the country, including the Shiite community. While the Afghan government and the ANA, the Afghan National Army, have done nothing to expand their base of support. It's a failed narco state. They can't even provide basic utilities. There's media reports about Taliban bragging about how they restored running water and garbage pickup. Now, the past 2 days, I've been trying to think about how I would make a video on Afghanistan that wouldn't be like an hour long and super boring. So I'm going to try to focus on two very specific topics. First, I'm going to talk about why America's leaving and why countries around the world are all blaming Biden. So essentially, the Trump administration sold the writing on the wall. They saw how incompetent the Afghan government was, and they knew that policing Afghanistan was a forever job, and they might as well just get out. Well, the country of Qatar never severed diplomatic relations with the Taliban. There's still a Taliban consulate or whatever in Qatar. So U.S. diplomats went to Qatar, negotiated with the Taliban. I believe it's February of 2020. These U.S. diplomats and the Taliban issue a joint statement basically saying that the Taliban is now a U.S. partner in the fight against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda-style Salafist groups. And this did not represent any change in Taliban policy because the Taliban was already fighting those groups in Afghanistan. And essentially, a framework was made where the U.S. would withdraw on May 1st as long as the Taliban continued to show good faith efforts to whatever, not be super terrible. The Taliban put out an official video on their website saying no one's allowed to shoot at American troops anymore. If any of our fighters do, there'll be serious consequences. And essentially, negotiations continued behind the scenes. Then, when Biden allegedly won the election, the negotiations with the Taliban should have been the number one biggest foreign policy priority for his transition team. As far as anyone can tell, the Biden administration just ignored it and did nothing. And last weekend, the press was hounding Biden for answers on Afghanistan and asking, what agreements do we have with the Taliban? And Biden just got angry and, classic Joe Biden. First, what Biden does is he said that May 1st is too soon, we can't leave yet. And some in the U.S. media actually sounded the alarm. It went largely unnoticed. But there was a few people in the U.S. media that did cry foul that Biden was extending this May 1st deadline. And then immediately after the deadline, the Taliban says, okay, well, you violated the agreement, now we're going to war again. Then Biden turns around and starts withdrawing troops real fast. And so now almost all the troops have left. What is being said in Afghanistan right now is that the main air base America was using, they're saying the Americans left in the middle of the night without telling anyone, and then all the Afghan personnel looted the base and just left. With the Taliban's rolling up on empty police stations, empty security posts, empty military bases, with armored vehicles, artillery pieces, and completely sealed shipping containers of American weapons, which is typical. That's played out in a bunch of countries. And some of the reports are saying that the Taliban is rolling into towns with wads of money to hire people to pick up the trash, and they're fixing the water pipes and restoring basic utilities, which just shows how pathetic the Afghan government was, that they couldn't keep anything running. Now, the Afghan government is blaming Joe Biden, and they're also blaming Pakistan, saying Pakistan is covertly funding the Taliban. A lot of other countries are very concerned. India, China, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Iran. Iran has been meeting with officials from the Afghan government, but they also had their first ever meeting with diplomats from the Taliban this week. India they're concerned about the terrorism aspect, about members of the Pashtun community in Afghanistan going to Kashmir and India to carry out jihadist terrorist attacks. India has been providing material support to the Afghan government. In fact, India just spent like $250 million building a dam in Afghanistan, and now this brand new dam has been taken over by the Taliban. China, they're mad because this whole time state-owned Chinese companies have been outbidding American companies for all the mineral rights in Afghanistan, which is one reason America's leaving, because none of our companies could compete with China in the bidding process for mineral rights. Except actually getting those minerals is hard because there's no infrastructure. And essentially, American troops were providing security for Chinese interests. Well, now, China's mad because they're concerned about all their investments in Afghanistan. And then you got Tajikistan just had all kinds of members of the Afghan National Army flee across the border, and so now they've called on Russia for help. Okay, so a lot of media reports are saying things like this is the new moderate Taliban, the reformed Taliban, the rebranded Taliban. I don't know if any of those descriptions really apply that much or how accurate they are, but I'm going to try to break down the reality here. So Afghanistan has a lot of different ethnic groups, and they don't so much like each other. I know diversity is our greatest strength, but no one ever told them in Afghanistan, and they just don't seem to notice how great diversity is. So during the Soviet-Afghan War, all kinds of Pashtun fled from the Pashtun territory of Afghanistan to the Pashtun territory of Pakistan. So basically, the Pashtun, they make up probably the largest ethnic group in Afghanistan, and they mostly live on both sides of the Afghan-Pakistani border. And once they were in Pakistan, the Pakistani authorities said, hey, we got free schools for your kids. And by free schools, they mean madrasas. So the madrasas, the Taliban is officially Deobandi Islam, which is a Hanafi revivalist movement. Hanafi is the main school of Sunni Islam that's practiced in Central Asia. Deobandi is pretty much considered mainstream Islam in Central Asia, but in India and Pakistan, a majority of all the privately funded Islamic schools are all Deobandi. So there's a big association with Deobandi and the madrasas. And so they send their kids to these madrasas, and then the Pakistani government gives them military training and guns and sends them back into Afghanistan as jihadists. And that's why Talib is the word for student. Taliban just means students. And so these are the students of the Pakistani madrasas. And so they go back, they fight the Soviet Union, blah, blah, blah. Eventually the Soviet Union leaves, and then the different ethnic groups of Afghanistan commence race war. And so the Taliban was the Pashtun, and then their big enemies, you had a collection of Uzbek militias and Tajik militias up in the north, and they form an alliance called the Islamic Front for the Salvation of Afghanistan. Now, don't think the Uzbeks and the Tajiks actually like each other, because since the fall of the Soviet Union, they have commenced race war all over Central Asia. But they banded together against the Taliban and the Pashtun. And then also the Hazara were fighting the Taliban because they're Shiites. One of the biggest sponsors of the Taliban's enemies was Iran, because they're the main protector of Shiite communities around the world. And then opposing the Taliban was also India, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. And they're battling out, and then 9/11 happens, and instead of going into Afghanistan and just wiping out Al-Qaeda, America says, no, before we even deal with Al-Qaeda, we're going to enter Afghanistan on one side of an ethnic conflict. And of course, Islamic Front for the Salvation of Afghanistan did not sound palatable to the American public, so they call it the Northern Alliance. So America enters the Civil War on behalf of the Northern Alliance. The Taliban is pushed back. They set up the Afghan government, and these former Uzbek and Tajik militias become the ANA, the Afghan National Army. And now, 10 years ago, independent journalists began writing articles saying that the Taliban was no longer just Pashtun, that they had dramatically expanded, and that they have fighters of all ethnic groups now. And one thing that the Taliban has been doing all along is they have shadow provincial governors and shadow district governors, and they started making members of other ethnic groups these shadow governors. And then eventually, a few years ago, they even started elevating members of other ethnic groups into the top leadership of the Taliban. And this even includes the Hazara Shiites. Meanwhile, the ANA just stayed the same. And members of the ANA would roll into a community displaying flags and pictures of ethnic leaders that the local population considered were war criminals. And I don't know if any effort was ever made. I know as recently as at least like 2015, 2016, independent journalists were still coming back from Afghanistan talking about this. And so the second thing you have is the fact that the Afghan government is so utterly incompetent, and a lot of the police departments are run by local warlords, many of whom participate in homosexual child rape, which is, Google it, it's true. And it's been going on in Afghanistan probably for over 2,000 years. It's a historical thing, and actually it's not even an Islamic thing. It predates Islam. And of course, then you have the heroin. So in the years leading up to the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the Taliban had declared war on poppy growing and had burning down the fields, and they had wiped out most of the heroin. When the United States invaded, it was their official policy to allow farmers to grow poppies for the purpose of making opium and heroin, because they thought if the farmers could grow it and make money, they would support U.S. interests and not support the Taliban. This is not classified, This is open information. The United States government, which also claims to be at war with drugs, used the American Army to provide material support for poppy farmers, giving them security and free fertilizer so they could flood the world with cheap opium and heroin. And if you think the heroin crisis in America is bad, it's way worse in Iran and Pakistan. That's probably the front lines. All right, thanks for watching this video. Click the like button, post a comment below, tell me what you think about all this, and click the subscribe button. New video every few days. And please subscribe to my backup channels on Odyssey and BitChute.